Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The house felt colder than usual. Grace stood motionless at the foot of the grand staircase, staring at the door that had just slammed shut. She could still hear the echo of the impact vibrating through the walls. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her body refused to move. The air around her seemed to press down, thick with an unfamiliar tension that made it hard to breathe. Ethan was gone. For the first time in their years of marriage, he had walked out on her, without warning, without a single word of explanation. And the worst part? She didn't even know what had gone wrong. Grace wasn't the kind of woman who let emotions control her. She was calm, patient, used to navigating the undercurrents of life with a quiet grace that no one noticed. That's why, when Ethan, her husband, her love, her partner in everything, looked at her with that cold, distant expression and said, "I don't even know who you are anymore," it felt like the world had shifted beneath her feet. Those words repeated in her mind, sharp and accusatory. Who you are anymore. The implication was clear. Ethan, the man who had shared a life with her, didn't recognize her. How could he say that? They had been through so much together, from the struggles of building a life to the comfort of knowing they had each other. They had been inseparable, or so she had thought. Grace swallowed hard, forcing herself to take a step toward the living room. She glanced around, taking in the familiar space that used to feel like home. The sleek, polished floors, the soft cream-colored walls, the furniture so carefully chosen to represent their success. Everything in this house screamed wealth. Yet now, standing in the middle of it, it felt like a cage. She wasn't used to feeling this way, vulnerable, exposed. She had always prided herself on being strong, unshakable. But this was different. The sudden ringing of her phone cut through the silence, and Grace jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Without thinking, she fumbled for her phone and answered it. "Grace," came a deep voice, one she hadn't heard in years. Her stomach flipped. It was a voice from her past. Not Ethan's. Not anyone she expected to hear from now. The words were slow, deliberate, almost as if the caller was choosing each one carefully. "We need to talk," the voice said. "It's about Ethan. And it's serious." The ground beneath her felt like it had shifted again. Serious? What could be serious enough to make someone from Ethan's past, someone who had been out of the picture for a long time, call her now? Grace's throat tightened, her pulse quickening as she tried to process the message. The question that sprang to mind was the same one that had been nagging at her all day: what's happening? Before she could respond, there was a click on the other end of the line. The call was over. Grace stood there, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to the silence. Her breath came in short bursts as she tried to grasp the significance of the conversation. She barely knew who the person on the other end had been, but the urgency in their voice made it clear that something wasn't right. And it had something to do with Ethan. For a moment, Grace stood frozen, her mind racing. Why would someone be calling her now? Why would they bring up Ethan in such a cryptic way? He had left without a word, with nothing but an accusation hanging in the air. Could this phone call be connected to that? She glanced at the door, her chest tightening as the reality of the situation settled in. Ethan had walked out of their marriage, and now she had a phone call that hinted at something bigger, something hidden. There was no time to waste. She needed answers. But where would she even begin? With a shaky breath, Grace walked to the door and threw it open, stepping outside into the crisp air. The house seemed to loom behind her, its grand exterior a stark contrast to the unease swirling in her chest. The driveway stretched out in front of her, empty now, save for the dark outline of Ethan's car disappearing into the distance. His departure was swift, almost deliberate, as if he was running from something. And she had no idea what it was. Her feet carried her instinctively to the car, her hands shaking as she reached for the door handle. She had no plan, no destination. She only knew that she couldn't stay here, alone with her thoughts. She needed to find out what was happening, why Ethan had acted the way he had. The engine purred to life as she pulled out of the driveway, the night sky above her dark and uninviting. She glanced at her phone, the screen still glowing in the dim light. She didn't know who had called her, but they had said it was about Ethan. It had to be important. But what could it possibly be? What could be so serious? The city loomed in the distance, its lights flickering like distant stars, and for the first time in years, Grace felt utterly alone. She had spent so much of her life in Ethan's world, in the bubble he had created for them. But now, with him gone, she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. As she drove through the quiet streets, her mind raced with possibilities. Could it be something to do with the business? Ethan had always been secretive about certain aspects of his empire. He was a billionaire, after all, and with that wealth came a multitude of risks. Maybe it was something to do with a deal gone wrong, a threat from an enemy. But why would he leave her out of it? The more Grace thought about it, the more questions piled up in her mind. And with each unanswered question, the tension in her chest grew tighter. After what felt like an eternity, Grace found herself outside a small, nondescript building. It was far from the grandiosity of Ethan's world, but it had a certain quiet dignity to it. A single light burned inside. Her heart pounded as she pulled into the parking lot, the gravel crunching under the tires. She didn't know why she was here, or who was waiting for her inside, but something told her this was where she needed to be. Grace took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, her legs feeling heavy with uncertainty. The building loomed in front of her, its windows dark, the door locked tight. She hesitated, wondering if she had made a mistake. But then, the door swung open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. The silhouette was familiar, but the face was not. The man standing in front of her wasn't someone she recognized, but there was something about him that felt ominous, like he knew far more than he was letting on. "Grace?" The voice was low, gravelly, and for a second, it almost seemed like he was expecting her. She nodded slowly, unable to speak. "Come inside," he said, stepping aside to let her through. Grace hesitated for just a moment before stepping into the unknown. She had no idea what she was walking into, but at this point, there was no turning back. As the door clicked shut behind her, Grace took a deep breath. She had no choice but to follow this trail, to find the answers that Ethan had denied her. But what would she find inside? And how much of the truth would she be able to handle? The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, but she steeled herself. She couldn't stop now. Whatever was waiting for her inside, it was about to change everything. The door clicked shut behind Grace with a finality that echoed in her ears. The chill of the night air that had followed her inside seemed to fade as she stood in the small, dimly lit room, her eyes struggling to adjust to the shadows. The man who had greeted her had already stepped back, giving her just enough space to cross the threshold. There was something about him, his quiet confidence, the way he held himself, that made Grace uneasy. She hadn't expected this. She had come here for answers, but now, standing in this unfamiliar place, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth. The room smelled faintly of old wood and something else she couldn't quite place. It was nothing like the grand, polished halls of her mansion. This space felt lived in, real in a way her life with Ethan never had. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents haphazardly arranged, as if someone had thrown them together in a rush. The low hum of a heater somewhere in the corner provided the only sound, other than the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. "Who are you?" Grace finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped further into the room, moving toward a worn leather chair. His movements were deliberate, measured. He glanced at her once, the look in his eyes unreadable, and then took a seat. "My name is Simon," he said, his voice deep but calm. "I'm someone from Ethan's past. Grace's heart skipped a beat. Ethan's past. She wasn't sure why, but that phrase sent a chill down her spine. Ethan had always been careful about his past, his childhood, his family, the years before his rise to success. He'd told her bits and pieces, but never anything too detailed. He preferred to keep things vague, as though those years were a different life entirely. But here was a man, Simon, claiming to know things about Ethan that she didn't. "Why am I here?" Grace asked, her voice shaky. "What does this have to do with Ethan?" Simon's gaze softened, but only slightly. He motioned toward the chair across from him, inviting her to sit. Grace hesitated, unsure of what to do. She had no choice but to stay. She had come all this way, and the last thing she wanted was to walk out without any answers. Finally, she sat down, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. "I understand this is all overwhelming for you," Simon began, his voice smooth but tinged with something darker, something more urgent. "But you need to understand something about Ethan. There's a side to him, a part of his life, that you've never seen. And that's exactly what's gotten him into trouble." "Trouble?" Grace echoed, the word slipping out before she could stop it. "What kind of trouble?" Simon leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. He was serious now, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "Ethan's world is dangerous, Grace. Not just because of the money or the power, but because of the people he's been involved with. There are things he's done, decisions he's made, that have come back to haunt him." The room seemed to shrink around her as she tried to absorb his words. Dangerous. The word hit her like a slap. She had never thought of Ethan's world as dangerous. Yes, there were pressures, high-stakes deals, and long hours, but it was all part of the life they had built. But Simon wasn't talking about business or corporate risks. He was talking about something else, something much darker. "Why are you telling me this?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What does it have to do with me?" Simon exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because, Grace, the reason Ethan left, it's not because of anything you did. It's because he's been hiding something from you. Something he couldn't protect you from any longer." Grace's heart clenched in her chest. Hiding something? The thought of Ethan, her Ethan, keeping secrets from her was unthinkable. But as Simon spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in their world, something she hadn't seen coming. "Ethan isn't who you think he is," Simon continued, his voice quieter now, as if he were weighing each word. "He's been involved in things. Dangerous people, illegal activities, that you don't know about. He's tried to keep you out of it, tried to shield you from the truth. But there's only so much he can do." Grace's mind reeled. Illegal activities? Dangerous people? The idea seemed impossible. Ethan had always been the man who prided himself on being a success, on building his empire from the ground up. He had always been the man who did everything right, or so she thought. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head slowly. "This doesn't make sense. Ethan would never get involved in anything illegal. He wouldn't." Simon leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "It's not about what he would or wouldn't do. It's about what he did, and what's coming for him now. People from his past are getting too close, Grace. And they know about you. They know about your connection to him. That's why he left you. To protect you." Grace felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Protect her? From what? From whom? "Who are these people?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly, panic creeping into her tone. "What do they want?" Simon met her gaze, his eyes dark and serious. "I don't know all the details, Grace. But I know this, they won't stop until they get what they want. And if they can't get to Ethan, they'll come for you. The weight of his words hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Grace's thoughts raced, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the life she had signed up for. This wasn't the marriage she had known. Ethan had promised her safety, stability, love. And now, in the span of a few hours, everything she thought she knew had crumbled into dust. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice shaking. She couldn't think straight. She felt as if the floor had been ripped out from under her, leaving her suspended in a world of uncertainty and fear. Simon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat there, staring at her, as if he were measuring her. After a moment, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You need to be careful, Grace. Trust no one but yourself. Ethan made a choice to protect you, but now you have to make your own choice. What happens next is up to you." His words hung in the air, a warning, a challenge. Grace's mind raced, the enormity of the situation settling over her like a heavy weight. There was so much she didn't understand. So much about Ethan's past that she didn't know. And yet, Simon was telling her it was too late to go back, that the past was closing in on them, on her. But where did that leave her now? And more importantly, where was Ethan? Was he really out there somewhere, trying to protect her from these unknown enemies? Or had he truly abandoned her, as his cold words seemed to suggest? For the first time in her life, Grace felt truly alone. She had always trusted Ethan, believed in him. But now, with each passing moment, she could feel the foundations of her world crumbling. "I need to talk to him," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to find Ethan." Simon shook his head slowly. "That's not going to happen, Grace. Not yet. You're not ready." The words stung, but there was no denying the truth in them. Grace wasn't ready. She wasn't ready for the chaos that was about to consume her life. But she had no choice. She couldn't sit back and wait for things to fall apart. She had to act. As she stood up from the chair, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, one thing was clear: the world she had known was gone. What remained now was a mystery that she would have to solve on her own, no matter how dangerous it might be. She glanced one last time at Simon, who was watching her with a mixture of pity and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "Be careful," he said softly, as she moved toward the door. "And don't trust anyone." Grace took a deep breath and stepped into the unknown. She didn't know where this journey would lead her. But she knew one thing for certain: she had to find Ethan, and she had to find the truth. Before it was too late. The air outside was thick with a kind of tension that made it hard for Grace to breathe. She barely noticed the cold as she stepped out of Simon's office and into the dimming night, her mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. The weight of the truth, half-formed, fragmented, and impossible to fully grasp, pressed down on her. Simon's words echoed in her head like a relentless drumbeat: "Trust no one but yourself." She didn't know what to think anymore. Ethan had left her, disappeared into the night without explanation. He had abandoned her, or so it seemed. Yet, Simon had made it clear that the choices Ethan had made weren't about their relationship at all. They were about something far bigger, something darker and more dangerous than Grace had ever imagined. Her fingers clenched around the steering wheel as she drove, the dark street stretching out before her, each turn seeming to lead her further away from the life she had once known. Her house, the one she had shared with Ethan for years, now felt like a distant memory, a place she could no longer call home. And as much as she tried to tell herself that this was temporary, that somehow everything would return to normal, the reality was clear: things had changed forever. Grace didn't know where to go next, but instinct guided her. She needed answers, and the only person who could give them to her was Ethan. But where was he? The night felt heavier now, suffocating in its silence. Grace's mind raced as she tried to piece together the puzzle that had shattered her world. What was this past Simon had hinted at? What secrets had Ethan kept from her, and why had he pushed her away when she needed him most? She turned a corner and found herself on a familiar road. The high-end shops and restaurants that lined it seemed alien to her now, their bright lights flickering like ghosts of a life she could never return to. She wasn't looking for distractions. She was looking for something, anything, that could explain why Ethan had done this to her. A sudden thought hit her, and her heart skipped a beat. The office. Ethan's office. She had been there countless times, worked alongside him, helped him with projects, run errands, but she had never once seen anything that suggested his life was anything other than the successful businessman he had portrayed. Had she been blind? Or had he been that good at keeping the truth from her? Without thinking, she swerved her car into the parking lot of the building where Ethan's office was located. The familiar structure loomed in front of her, its glass windows reflecting the city lights. The building looked just as sleek and modern as it had always been, but to Grace, it now seemed like a fortress, cold, impersonal, and full of secrets. Her breath caught in her throat as she parked her car. It was late, too late for anyone to be around, but that didn't matter. She needed to go in. She needed to see for herself what Ethan had been hiding. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something there that could help her make sense of everything. She got out of the car, her footsteps echoing on the pavement as she walked toward the entrance. The doors to the building were locked, but the security guard inside, an older man she had seen around before, looked up as she approached. His eyes flickered with surprise but softened when he recognized her. "Grace," he said with a nod. "What are you doing here this late?" "I need to see something," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Is Ethan's office still open?" The guard hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "I don't know, Mississippi. It's been a strange few days. But, well, if you really need to see it, I can let you in." Grace didn't hesitate. "Please." The guard gave a reluctant nod, then shuffled to the back to retrieve his keys. Grace stood there, staring at the tall glass building, trying to steady her racing heart. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she had to look. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The guard returned and unlocked the door, holding it open for her. Grace stepped inside, the cool air of the lobby brushing against her skin. The building was eerily quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound. She made her way to the elevator, her hands shaking as she pressed the button for the top floor, the floor where Ethan's office had been for years. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft hiss, and as the elevator ascended, she couldn't help but wonder what she was about to find. Was there a secret room? A hidden file? She had no idea. But there had to be something. She just had to find it. The elevator dinged, signaling her arrival, and the doors opened to the sleek, modern hallway. Ethan's office was just down the corridor. It had always been a space of power, a place where decisions were made, deals were struck, and the world was shaped by the man she had loved. But tonight, the hallway felt different. The polished floors gleamed in the dim light, and the glass doors of the office stared at her like an imposing wall. Grace approached the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she should turn back, that this might not be the right thing to do. But there was no turning back now. She had to know. The door opened with a soft click, and she stepped inside. The office was just as she remembered it, sleek, minimalistic, and almost sterile in its perfection. The large windows on one side provided a stunning view of the city skyline, but tonight, the view seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Grace's gaze scanned the room, searching for anything that might give her a clue as to what Ethan had been hiding. There were the usual things: his desk, the chairs, the bookshelves filled with business-related books and files. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but Grace wasn't fooled. She knew Ethan better than anyone, and she knew when something was off. Her eyes landed on a drawer in the corner of the desk. It was slightly ajar, as if it had been hurriedly closed. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't want to snoop. She didn't want to invade his privacy. But in that moment, she didn't care. She needed answers, and this was the only way she was going to get them. With a shaky hand, she pulled open the drawer. Inside, there were a few papers, some pens, and a small black notebook. She grabbed the notebook, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. The pages were filled with tight, precise handwriting, the kind of notes Ethan had always kept. But this was different. These weren't business notes. These were personal. And the more she read, the more she realized just how deep Ethan's secrets went. The notebook chronicled meetings, names she didn't recognize, and cryptic phrases that made her stomach twist. It was clear now. Ethan had been involved in something much darker than she had ever imagined. These weren't just business deals. These were transactions, arrangements, promises made with people she could only assume were dangerous. And right at the heart of it all was Ethan. Grace's breath caught in her throat as she turned another page, her eyes scanning the names of individuals she had never heard of before. And then, near the back of the notebook, there was something that made her blood run cold, a single phrase written in bold letters. The endgame is close. It's time to make her disappear. Grace slammed the notebook shut, her heart racing. Disappear? Her mind couldn't process the words. What was Ethan involved in? And why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't he trusted her enough to let her in on whatever was going on? Her hands were shaking as she placed the notebook back in the drawer, carefully closing it. She couldn't stay here any longer. The truth, whatever it was too much to bear. Ethan had left her not because of some petty disagreement or mistake. He had left to protect her from something, someone, but what? As Grace stood there, frozen in place, her mind whirled with questions, but one thing was clear, the life she had known, the life she thought she shared with Ethan, was gone. What remained was a dangerous game, and she was right in the middle of it. There was no going back now. Grace had to find Ethan, had to figure out the next move. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed answers. And the only way to get them was to uncover the truth behind Ethan's past, before it was too late. With a final look at the office, Grace turned and walked out, her mind made up. The game had begun, and she wasn't going to stop until she had uncovered every last secret. Grace's heart raced as she sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled tension. The streets around her were eerily quiet, the cityscape spread out before her, indifferent to the storm brewing inside her. She had just uncovered things about Ethan, things no wife should ever have to learn. And yet, it was the painful reality now. The veil had been pulled back, revealing a dark, complicated truth that had shaken her to her very core. But it wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about her, too. She had been dragged into a world she didn't understand, a world where trust was a luxury, and betrayal ran deep. She had always believed that love could overcome anything, that together, she and Ethan could face anything life threw at them. Now, she wasn't sure if she even knew the man she had married. For the first time in her life, Grace felt as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure of which way to turn. She had so many questions, so much pain, but she also had a single, burning need, to find Ethan. To understand why he had left her, to understand why he had let her walk into this nightmare without him. As she drove, her mind continued to replay everything she had learned, the cryptic notes in Ethan's office, the mention of "disappear" in those chilling words. She had always known that there was something about Ethan's business that felt off, something in the way he was always so guarded about certain aspects of his life. But this was something else entirely. He hadn't just been hiding things. He had been lying to her. And the worst part was, she didn't even know if he had ever truly loved her the way she had loved him. The thought was unbearable. But she couldn't stop it. She couldn't stop thinking about how easily Ethan had seemed to vanish from her life. Had it been so easy for him to walk away from everything they had built together? Had it been that easy for him to push her out of his world, to send her into the jaws of whatever it was he had been trying to protect her from? Grace wiped a tear from her cheek, blinking rapidly. Focus, she told herself. You're not alone in this. You can still find him. She had to. For herself, for the life they had shared, and for the truth that was slowly but surely coming into focus. Hours passed as Grace navigated the cold streets, her destination unclear. All she knew was that she had to follow the breadcrumbs. She had to trust the one thing that still remained in her life, her instincts. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, the sound breaking the silence that had fallen over the car. She glanced at it, her breath catching in her throat when she saw the name on the screen. Simon. For a brief moment, Grace considered ignoring the call. After everything Simon had told her, she didn't know whether she could trust him. But she needed more answers. She needed to know how deep this rabbit hole went. And maybe, just maybe, Simon could help her make sense of all this. With a shaky hand, Grace answered the call. Hello? Her voice trembled more than she wanted to admit. Grace, Simon's voice came through, steady and calm, but with an undertone of urgency. I don't have much time, but I need you to listen carefully. Things are worse than we thought. Ethan, he's in danger. Grace's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? What's happening? There are people, powerful people, who want Ethan gone. They've been after him for a long time, but now they know about you. They know you're looking for him. Simon paused, as if weighing his next words. Grace, you need to be very careful. Trust no one. Not even the people you think you can trust. Her heart was hammering in her chest. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. I need to find him. I have to understand why he did this, why he left me. I can't just. Grace, listen to me, Simon interrupted. There's more. Ethan didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because he had no choice. These people, these enemies of his, they've been after him for years. But now it's serious. They've crossed a line. They've made it personal. Grace's mind spun. Personal? How could it be personal? What did that mean? What are you telling me? She whispered, her voice thick with fear and confusion. I'm telling you that Ethan is in hiding. He's trying to protect you. But you're not safe. Not until you understand who these people are. And you need to know that you're involved in this, whether you like it or not. The word sent a chill through Grace, but she steadied herself. She couldn't back down now. Not after everything. Not after what she had discovered. Where is he? She demanded, her voice more forceful than she intended. Where is Ethan? I can't tell you that. Not yet, Simon replied, his voice grave. But I can tell you this, if you want to find him, if you want to understand everything that's going on, you need to come to me. I can help you, but only if you're ready to hear the truth. Grace didn't hesitate. I'm ready. Good, Simon said. I'll send you an address. But remember, Grace, you have to be careful. Don't trust anyone. I'll be waiting for you. The call ended abruptly, and Grace was left in stunned silence. Her mind was spinning, the fragments of information Simon had shared with her still echoing in her head. She had never imagined that things could get this complicated, this dangerous. She glanced down at her phone, seeing a message from Simon with an address. Without thinking, she pulled the car onto a side street and followed the instructions on the screen. Her pulse raced as she drove toward an unknown destination, each mile bringing her closer to whatever was waiting for her. It didn't take long before Grace arrived at the address Simon had sent. It was a rundown warehouse in the industrial part of town, a place she never would have expected to find someone like Simon, or Ethan, for that matter. The warehouse was quiet, the kind of place where secrets were kept, where deals were made behind closed doors. She parked her car a short distance away, scanning the area carefully. The last thing she wanted was to walk into a trap. The shadows seemed to stretch around her, wrapping the building in an eerie stillness. There were no signs of life, no indication that anyone was there. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Grace swallowed hard and stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath before walking toward the entrance. Her footsteps were muffled by the ground beneath her, but the silence felt oppressive, like a heavy weight on her shoulders. As she reached the door, it creaked open just enough for her to slip inside. The warehouse was vast, its interior dark and cavernous. She could barely make out the shapes of stacked crates and discarded machinery, and the faint smell of oil and dust hung in the air. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was Simon. His face was as calm as always, but there was something in his eyes now, something darker, more urgent. "Grace," he said, his voice low. "You made it. What's going on?" "Where's Ethan?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Simon gestured for her to follow him, leading her deeper into the warehouse. "We're getting close, Grace. But this is bigger than you or me. Bigger than Ethan. This is about power, control, and people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. Ethan thought he could protect you from it, but this," he paused, then looked at her, his gaze intense. "This is just the beginning." They stopped in front of a door, an old steel door that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Simon pulled out a key and unlocked it, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. "You want the truth?" he asked, turning to her. "This is it. Follow me." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. The truth, whatever it was just down there. And she was going to find it. With a final look at Simon, she took the first step into the unknown, ready to face the mystery that had taken over her life, ready to uncover the secrets Ethan had kept from her. Whatever happened next, she would face it head on. And she would find Ethan, no matter the cost.